the challenge and the reward for me has always been knowing that I figured it out on my own based on the knowledge I've acquired.
Time for the Angler Within podcast with Roy Bilby.
So how have you been?
I've been good, Roy. I just got off the water this evening. I got skunked, had the fly rod, and got on some. But here's the good part about having a drought and having virtually no water in any of our creeks and streams around here. You can get out and see where all the holes really are. You know, the embankments, exposed root systems, deadfalls that you didn't know were there until the water disappeared.
Been looking at all that on the bodies of water I've been fishing because the water's 3.5 foot down everywhere. And I tell you what, the fall beat down on the smallmouth has not started in earnest whatsoever. I've been out numerous times. I mean, the second half of October is when things really start, the water temps start dropping and things really start picking up bite wise. And if you know where to go, you start really cracking them pretty good. And it's been a grind everywhere I've been. I'm still getting, 15, 20 smallmouth, but I should be getting 30 to 40 right now without too much effort. And by November, which is just around the corner,
Hold on. I love the fact that, struggling for you is really grinding out 15 smallmouth. 15.
I know I'm jaded. I got to remind myself of that.
I mean,
all the time.
Princess Roy.
I've worked at this for 40 years, writing this down
I know you have.
and studying it to get to the level where I expect 30 or 40 second half of October because I've done it over and over and over, but it's not happening yet. Water temps are down to 50, but it's good grief. It and that's all well and good, but we'll have a couple nights right around 30 degrees, and then it's still 50 when you go to bed, and it's 40 something in the morning. Instead of a steady, gradual decline in temperatures, it's going up and down, up and down, up and down, and it's fluctuating so much. I've seen water temperatures go back up, and that just really, really messes with the fish.
Sure.
The one thing we do have going for us is that there's two triggers this time of year that really move the fish shallow to feed. One is the falling water temperature, which has been haywire, and the other one is the shorter photo period of the day, where days are shorter and shorter, less and less daylight every day. That's consistent. That doesn't change. That's the same every year. But this is one of those years where that water temperature just can't regulate itself yet. When it does, mark my words, when it does, and it drops into the 40s, you're going to see an onslaught of smallmouth eaten with reckless abandon because all the clues in nature are telling them to do that, and it's not happening because the water temperature is messing with them big time. When it does drop and it gets consistent, it's going to be ridiculous. That's my prediction. Seen it before. But what I want to talk about in this podcast, and I want to thank a couple people for jumping on the buy angler bandwagon, the phrase that you coined with our last podcast. I told you we were going to get feedback from that. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Gary Brooker out in the Finger Lakes region in New York State. He texted me this morning. I was up getting coffee and my phone tells me there's a text message, but it gives me a notification, and I look and it's from my buddy Gary Brooker. He goes, "Hey, I learned something today. I'm a buy angler." Now, qualify that, you got to understand Gary lives on Cayuga Lake, which is a two-tier fishery. We don't call it a bi-fishery. It's a two-tier fishery. It supports both warm water and cold water species. So you can fish for trout in the lower end of the lake where it's much deeper and cooler, or you can migrate to the north end and catch largemouth, perch, and every smallmouth, everything that's in that lake as far as warm water species. So, yeah, your little phrase you coined, "bi-angler," is it's starting to take off.
I think
But
it's a good phrase. I think it
I
makes sense.
when you said it, I went, "Did I not say,
It's
'Oh, we're
mul
gonna get feedback on
yeah,
that?' You just coined a new term." But you that card, yeah, but you I am multi-species, so are you. But you said, "I don't qualify as a bi-angler because I only use traditional casting gear. I don't use fly gear."
right.
That's what qualifies you as a bi-angler. So, congratulations.
Thank you. So quick question for you before we go into this.
Quick
Um,
answer, let's see if they match.
uh, that's a good comeback, Roy. When you are out fishing and things aren't, and I know that for you sometimes things aren't sometimes working.
Absolutely. Yeah,
What
yeah.
is your dialogue in your head? How hard are you on yourself?
I used to be a lot harder on myself. Why can't I figure this out? But I've come to the realization that there's just some days when the fish do not want to cooperate. So for me, it's more not I am a little hard on myself because I always feel with studying this for 40 years, I should be able to figure this out. And I pride myself in not getting skunked. I'm on a pretty good string now. I'm right around 100 consecutive trips without getting skunked. I hate getting skunked, but it happens. I like to say I am tragically human. It happens. But I pride myself in working hard enough where I can always figure out a way to catch fish. And so when I'm having one of those days when it's just not happening, I I sit down and rather than beat myself up anymore, I I go into analyze mode. All right, why are they not biting? They should be. I've done all the things that I should be doing right now, given the criteria I'm faced with fall. Water temp is down to 52 degrees. Days are shorter. They should be in the shallows. They should be eating these baits I'm throwing because that's what works this time of year. But if it's not working, all right, do I need to go to a brighter color? Do I need to go to a darker color? Do I need to work my bait a little more to trigger them? Or do I need to let it sit and soak? I'll tell you what, the other day we were fishing, me and a buddy, and it was we were just not getting bit. And but there were 2 times when I we were just, having a conversation, and I'm working my jig on the bottom, expecting a strike, and I stopped, took my hand off the rod with my right hand, and went to gesture to him, and when I did, I felt the tap, and I instantly told him, I said, "We need to slow down." I stopped moving my bait, and a fish hit it. I missed the fish, and then later, when I stopped to lean over and grab my coffee mug and get another sip of coffee, I get a tap. I'm like, "We've got to slow down and soak our baits." I started doing that. I'd retrieve partway back to the boat, and I just stall and let it sit. Work it back a little bit more, stall, let it sit. When that happens, what I think is going on is fish are sometimes you can trigger fish without adding extra action to the bait. Like with a spinner bait in the summertime, I get a lot of strikes by triggering fish by doing a steady retrieve and then changing direction sharply and your rod loads up. Or you're reeling a steady retrieve and you snap the handle twice to speed that give that little spinnerbait a burst and your rod loads up. There's so many ways you can trigger fish. Sometimes I'll retrieve it at a pretty good clip and then I'll just kill it. And when you go to retrieve again, your rod loads up. Those are all triggering mechanisms to get fish to bite and trigger them to bite. But as you were entering the cold water period, I do the opposite. Got to remember, fish are cold blooded, so their body temperature is the same as the water. They're cooling down too. So, what happens to you when you get cold? You move slower, you get a little more lethargic. This time of year, I'll try to trigger them by stopping the bait. When that happens, I believe they're following the bait, they're interested, but they just don't have the gumption to run it down. So, when you stop it, like when you let go of your rod with one hand and reach over to grab your coffee mug and you get a strike, you gave that fish that was following an opportunity to catch up to that bait and pick it up. So that's how I trigger them this time of year. So yeah, when the bite is a grind, when it's slow, I don't really beat up on myself like I used to. I've learned to reanalyze, regroup, and slow down. And that puts fish in the boat. Good question. What I'd like to talk about on this podcast is something that's been going on in the fishing industry on the three major bass tournament circuits and trails. It's something that we all knew was coming, and I've talked about forward facing sonar before a little bit, and I'll get into my opinion on it in the second part of this. But all three of the major national tours came out with decisions this year for the 2025 season on how they're going to address the forward facing sonar live scope issue. BASS, the Bassmaster Elite Series, they came out with a ruling and they had a panel working on this all year to determine, how much live sonar is affecting the game, how how much it's impacting results. And it definitely has had an impact. And what they decided to do, number one, limit competitors to one live sonar transducer. One. It has to be mounted on the bow trolling motor. And they also limited competitors to 55 total inches combined screen space. In other words, you can have however many units you want, electronic units on your boat, but you cannot exceed 55 inches total of combined screen space. Now, the reason they did that was largely for safety. If you follow professional bass tournaments, you've seen these guys, they got 6 units on their boats, and a lot of times they're the big 12 or 14-inch screens. They'll have 3 on the front deck where they're running the trolling motor, but they'll also have 3 mounted on the dash, and it's obstructing their view. So there's a lot of creating all kinds of blind spots. You've got a boat that will run 75 miles an hour down the lake and you're creating blind spots you can't see around. That's that's a safety issue. So they limit it to 55 total inches combined screen space, and one live sonar transducer has to be mounted on a bow trolling motor. Now, what people may not realize is what was going on this year. They were seeing, and there was no rules against this, there are now, but they were seeing competitors creating an unfair advantage for themselves. And trust me, bass tournaments are all about creating a level playing field. That's what the rules are designed to do as much as possible. But they were having a handful of guys out there who were actually running 3 trolling motors. They were mounting trolling motors on their power poles and they had live transducers all over the place. So these guys, instead of idling around and watching a graph, they were watching screens all mounted to trolling motors and were booking down the lake with 3 trolling motors and and monitoring all these screens and not making a cast until they saw groups and schools of fish and had spent enough time with their electronics to know which fish were bass and which fish were not. So they eliminated that from the game entirely by the rulings of limiting people to one live sonar transducer. It has to be one that they approve. They have a list of approved ones and limiting their total screen space. That's what the Bass Angler Sportsman Society did for all the elite series events, and that is the number one circuit in the world. MLF, Major League Fishing, that's a totally different format of professional fishing if you're not familiar with it. And they fish three different periods. You fish for 2.5 hours. Everybody fishes for 2.5 hours, and then you shut down. Lines in at the beginning of the period. 2.5 hours later, lines out. You're down for 30 minutes, and then it's lines in again for 2.5 hours. At the end of that 2.5 hours, lines out, everybody, and then 30 minutes later, you fish for another 2.5 hours, and that's your day. And that created all kinds of different scenarios because you can find fish after 2 hours and find a good schooling, get them fired up on a ledge bite, and you're catching them for 30 minutes, and they're still firing on all cylinders, and you hear the whistle, lines out, and that's it. You've gotta sit for 30 minutes, no line in the water, knowing that you got a school fired up, and where the heck are they gonna be 30 minutes later? You start fishing when the clock starts again and your fish have moved, and now you gotta relocate them. So, it's a totally different scenario with its own challenges. And what they did, uh they made it so you can use forward-facing sonar, but you can only use it in one of the 3 periods of the day. You choose which period, and you have to let them know which period you're gonna use it again. And what you need to know is that the MLF circuit, the angler has full control of the boat, but he has a cameraman and an official in his boat in case he breaks any rules or has any infractions. You can't let the fish hit the carpet. That's a 2-minute penalty. There's it's a totally different format. And they are allowed to have 2 live transducers. They do not limit them to any amount of screen space at all. They can have however many units they want, but they can only have 2 live transducers on their boat. And then the 3rd circuit, which is the NPFL, the National Professional Fishing League, they took a radical step and totally eliminated, said it is illegal to use on our circuit. You cannot use it. And again, they all did it to create a more level playing field. And again, live sonar, live scope, it's a tool. It's no more a tool than like a rod and reel is, or a particular lure, or even your boat and motor. That's one of your tools. The problem they had is people were exclusively using that forward-facing sonar and not even making a cast until they saw a fish, and it eliminated a lot of skill and knowledge and reasoning from the equation. And I just want to explain again the difference between live or forward facing sonar as compared to traditional sonar. Traditional sonar gives you history. You have a transducer on your transom or on your trolling motor, and you're using traditional 2D sonar, down scan, side scan, anything like that. What you see come on the screen, you see it come on the screen as you run over it. So as it goes across your screen, you're already past it. It's already behind you. The the difference between that and the reason they call it live sonar is showing you everything in real time. And you put it on your trolling motor, it looks everywhere. Wherever you pivot that trolling motor head with your foot pedal, that's where you're looking. So it's easy. Most trolling motors have an indicator on the head of the trolling motor that shows you which way the head of your trolling motor your lower unit is facing, and that's the where you're looking with your live transducer. So you can look everywhere in a circle, but you're doing it in real time. And it shows you if there's fish there, you'll see them swimming around and you can see which direction the fish are moving and you know which way to go. You can't do that with traditional sonar. That's why the live sonar is so radically different and why it has changed the game so much. The problem I have with it is if you rely on that as your only tool, as some of these competitors have been doing, you're not using the tool that God gave you, the one between your ears. You're not using your intuitive instinct that you've gained from playing this game for decades. A lot of these guys, there's young guys come up and comers that are just cleaning house because they won't even make a cast until they see a fish. And what happened to intuitive instinct? What happened to studying and getting knowledge and learning how to put together the pieces of the puzzle on any given day? For me, that was always the deal. My deal has always been about solving the puzzle on any given day with the knowledge I've acquired by keeping my journals and applying that knowledge each and every day during all these different seasonal phases of the year to, have successful results. Trusting the knowledge that I've acquired by writing all this down for 40 years and an intuitive instinct, relying on that, not relying on some electronic device to do it for me. That has no fascination for me. The challenge and the reward for me has always been knowing that I figured it out on my own based on the knowledge I've acquired and going out and using speculative reasoning to determine how I should catch fish on any given day. I'll get to a lake. I don't care what time of year it is. You pick a seasonal period. I will take water temperature. I will look at water clarity. I will look at the sky conditions and the wind direction. And depending on my target species that particular day, and taking into account the seasonal period that we're in, I'll already have 3 starting places in mind, and I'll know what I'm going to throw based on the readings I've already taken. I'm not relying on some device to do that for me. I'm doing that myself, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of doing that. That's always been the deal for me, figuring out the puzzle on my own, not having an electronic instrument doing it for me. I want that as a tool to put my information together for me. It's no more important to me than my water temperature gauge or my barometer or any of the things that, my pH monitor, anything that all these readings that I take help me put that puzzle together. And now these guys who have not even studied it have a device they can buy that does all that for them and says, here's the fish right here. This is where you need to throw. I would rather figure that out on my own. Now I know and you get a lot of flack from people saying, "Well, that's just another tool that's been improved," and 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 the fish will get used to that, and they're already in these lakes that are highly, highly pressured. The fish are already reacting to it. I think I talked about that last podcast where Clark Wendelin, he's a old school angler, and he went down the bank in a couple tournaments and cleaned house because he saw other guys live scoping. He would just go to where they were all offshore live scoping, and he'd go straight into the bank, and it was loaded with fish who had migrated there to get away from all those sonar pings. I mean, some of these guys had half a dozen live transducers mounted all over their boat, and it's just that sends down a ping. It's sonar, people, underneath the water radar. All right. It sends out a ping, and by the how long it takes it to return, it determines how far it is to the bottom. And if there's something between you and the bottom, it's going to send that back information and it forms a picture. That's how it works. But all those pings are going down into the water, and the fish are reacting negatively to it. Now, in the lakes we fish out here, it's not that prominent, but if you go to some of the heavily fished tournament lakes, we're going to start to see that out here too. And again, for me, I have to figure out the puzzle using my intuition based on seasonal patterns. And it's not a tool that people should solely rely on. That's my personal opinion. But I think that they were seeing anglers that were doing that, that were solely relying on those electronics, and they had to address it. They had to make changes accordingly. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the 2025 season. And I know there's going to be some people that there's a lot of people that just love the live sonar, the forward facing sonar. And it doesn't matter if it's Lowrance Humminbird or Garmin who came out with it first. Everybody has their preferences. I have Garmin on my boat, but I do not overuse it. Good grief, people will get set with me because I use it 5% of the time. It's just another tool for me. And the problem is you can use it as a tool to eliminate all the others. And I refuse to do that because I've based my career on the knowledge I've gained by writing everything down in my journals and creating a very intuitive instinct. And a lot of times I fish by the seat of my pants because I've acquired all this experience over the last 40 years, and you know how to read the water. It's it's the same as let me give you an analogy I came up with that will help put the forward facing sonar in perspective because I know I've got friends who like, "Oh man, I love it. It's the greatest thing ever." And I want them to just rethink that position. Put yourself in this scenario. Let's say, and I'm going to use a deer hunting analogy here because I'm just as passionate about my deer hunting as I am about my fishing, about all my hunting, my small game, my deer hunting, partridge, turkey hunting. Don't get me started on turkey hunting. We've gone down that rabbit hole before. I'm eaten up with it. Anything with the critters, whether they swim, crawl, walk, or fly, I'm into it. But I know a lot of guys that fish are just as heavily into the hunting and deer hunting in particular as they are in the fishing. So I would ask those guys who are dead set on the forward facing sonar is the greatest thing ever. I want you to clear your mind and give me a fair shot in throwing this analogy at you. Let's say you could download an app on your phone for deer hunting where you could go on 1,500 acres of state land, arguably some of the toughest land to hunt because there's so many people on it. The deer are they're educated. Let's say you have an app on your phone that you can go on that 1,500-acre state land that has all these other hunters on it, and it will show you in real time where every deer on that property is located. Just like live sonar, it will show you in actual real time where every deer on that property is located right now and which direction they're headed. Now, if you're paying attention to wind direction and you can actually still hunt, most people can't, they make too much noise. But if you can do that, how easy do you think it's going to be to go and get a deer every time you're out there because you know where they are? And most guys that I know would say, well, that's not deer hunting. Yet it's perfectly okay to use live sonar to go fishing. It's apples to apples here, folks. If you had an app for your phone where you could download it and it would show you where all the deer are in real time, you were pretty much guaranteed a deer every time you go out. I have no interest in hunting like that. I like the challenge of the unknown. I base my deer hunting on where I've seen deer use established trails on my property. I know where they run. I know where they feed. I know where their bedding areas are. That's what deer hunting is all about. Locating the travel corridors between feeding and bedding sites. And and setting yourself in position to intercept them traveling back and forth, or put a stand on an area where they feed, or put it just outside of a bedding area on their way to where they go feed. That's how you find success in deer hunting. Do you want a device on your phone that will eliminate the need to go out and scout? Scouting's parting of deer hunting. It's an awesome part of it, and it it gets it gets you fired up. Yeah, we're going to see him. This is going to work. Wait do you see where I put my stand this year? Wait do you see this spot? I can't believe I never found it before. You know, the discovery of a new spot. I found a new trail on my property this year. They just started making. Unfortunately, they're only using it at night, so that doesn't help me with my deer hunting. That's all part of this, all the preparation and anticipation. And if you have an app that you can download that shows you where they are at any given moment on any given property, any given day, you don't need to do any of that prep. You just need to go in, check the wind direction, see where they are, and go ambush them. Let them walk right into you. Congratulations, you got another deer. How hard was that? I don't know anybody who would want a deer hunt that way. So, why do they want to fish that way? Because essentially, that's what live sonar is doing. It takes all the guesswork, all the planning, all the preparation, all the scouting, all the studying, and all the knowledge, and just throws it out the window and eliminates the need for it because you have a device that does it for you. That's my opinion on forward facing sonar. It's a tool that I use maybe 5% of the time, but I don't use it in the traditional method where I see fish and throw to them. I just don't. You can do it without, 10 grand worth of electronics. But if that's your deal, you know, go for it. But would you want to deer hunt that way? Think about it. Keep an open mind. That's my 2 cents. And I hope we get positive feedback, not negative feedback.
I don't think we're gonna get any negative feedback. I
Well,
think
you
we're all right.
certainly let me go off on a rant there for a while. I just wanted to voice my opinion because all 3 of the major circuits came out and voiced theirs and said, "This is how we are addressing it." If it was not a problem, they wouldn't have had to do that.
That's right.
And it has unleveled the playing field, and you can't have that in competition. Just like in baseball when people were corking their bats. You can't do that. It eliminates the level playing field. Can't use steroids. That eliminates the level playing field. You can't do that. It's illegal. You'll get fined, and it's an unfair advantage. And forward facing sonar, unless it's regulated somehow, can turn into an unfair advantage. And they saw that this year. If they did not see it, they would not have had to address it, but they did. So that's my 2 cents. And I know there's people that disagree with me, but I'm hoping that deer hunting analogy that I came up with will give them a different perspective and a different way to look at it.
Perfect.
And there's probably guys that are going to go, yeah, I would never deer hunt that way, but I'm still going to fish that way because it's cool. And you know, I just I want to give people pause to think. So there you go. I spend a lot of money for the technology and I barely use it because I like fishing intuitively.
And you hate
Randy
technology.
Blockett would agree with me.
And you hate technology.
I'm 65, all right? I didn't grow up with technology. The technology I grew up with was knobs and dials, okay?
Dial yourself right into Roy's DMs at Roy Bilby on Instagram. And Roy, you make it a thing to respond to everybody, don't you?
Yes, I do. If you message me, I will respond. And I appreciate everybody that does reach out, getting a lot of positive feedback. We truly appreciate it. Just trying to disseminate as much information as possible. Every podcast to help everybody that listens dial into their angler within.